Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple questions for the proponent of the bill through you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple questions related. First, if you could clarify I heard you state that there were exceptions for certain hospitals, including Yale New Haven. What is the scope of the exception for Yale New Haven?
Through you, Mr. Speaker. So that exception that I spoke about concerns the third part of the Act that deals with the residential real property used for student housing. So that exception piece does not apply to the hospital piece, and I'll get clarification on whether or not the hospital piece, if Yale's involved in that. But I've always understood the Yale Hospital to be separate from Yale University. But that particular piece that I was addressing, through you, Mr. Speaker, dealt with the use of residential real property for student housing. If a university owns that residential real property and uses it for student housing, the municipality can bring that property back onto the tax rolls. That provision would not apply to Yale University, Wesleyan, Conn College. As a practical matter, frankly, they don't own the types of properties that we're talking about. Yale, for example, does exactly what you would expect a good university to do. They build their dormitories on campus. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars now on two gorgeous dormitories on the Yale campus. Those remain part of the Yale campus and not taxable, not part of the municipal tax base in New Haven. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that answer. I have a couple of questions, specific examples in my district. I have a pediatric firm that was recently purchased by Yale New Haven Hospital. Under the provision of this bill, it was purchased 3 years ago. Would that now be a taxable asset under the provisions of this bill? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative D'Agostino.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was having trouble hearing the question. If I could get it one more time.
Representative France, could you repeat your question, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, the question I have is related to a property in my district. It was a pediatric firm that was recently purchased by Yale New Haven Hospital 3 years ago. So after the 2009 timeline that has been talked, would that property now become, under the provisions of this bill, taxable? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative D'Agostino.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to give a wrong answer. The best answer I think I can give is if that particular hospital falls within the definitions here that are the restricted definitions here that are covered by this Act, nonprofit general hospital facility, freestanding chronic disease hospital, if it falls within those definitions, then yes, that property would become taxable. If, again, the business was previously taxable on the tax rolls and was primarily used for the provision of medical services. So if it meets those criteria, then yes, through you, Mr. Speaker, I don't know off the top of my head if those criteria are met in that specific example.
Representative France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you for that answer. Final example I have is similarly a hospital who carried a piece of property and it transitioned from one hospital to another 2 years ago. In that example, would we be in the same position even though it would transfer from one hospital to another? Is that transfer ownership now, even though it was owned by the first hospital prior to the 2009 date, does that now become a taxable piece of property under this provision of this bill? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative D'Agostino.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Again, let's assume for purposes of the question that it is a hospital covered under this Act. This would not apply to that transaction because, again, we're not talking about that sort of narrow sliver of business that we were talking about with the provision of medical services. Those standard property transfers, whatever the status quo is for them, that status quo continues to apply, not affected by this bill. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the answers. I am very troubled by the retroactive nature of this tax. Once again, we make a commitment. Now we're talking about hospitals, and other speakers have spoke eloquently about the challenges they face. We are trying to make a business climate in this state that is favorable to businesses, and now what we're doing is we're now taking another stab at them in the case of hospitals and making a retroactive tax where they've made business decisions, and now we're saying that those business decisions are faulty because we changed the rules after the fact. Based on that, there's no way I can support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.